Okay. I think I'm on now. I was having some weird thing come up with Facebook, which seems to be my weekly thing these days. Anyhow, welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression and of Ascended World, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. So I wanted to talk this week about what's next and moving forward. Sarah C. Gavignoni and I spoke on Monday on Ascended World about what's come. Actually, it wasn't this Monday. I think it was last Monday. We talked about what's being tied up in the old cycle of things, right? What's been the challenge? Like we've been talking about how everything that doesn't serve us, like we're not doing this cycling anymore. So we're taking things out of a circle and we're making them a spiral instead, which, some people say I'm spiraling, meaning that it, gets out of control and bad. But actually, when we talk about a spiral versus a circle, circle is never ending repetition of no start and no end, right? But a spiral is more of an expansion or, a contraction, depending on how you look at it. So going back to the core of source or going out to the whole of source, however you want to look at it. So, so in doing that, like if we really want to change, so like this has been, and what Sarah and I talked about, if you really want to look at what we talked about, you need to go back to I think it was the 29th, our episode of Ascended World from the 29th, where we talked about the if I don't see comments today. Oh, there's anyway. It's a weird. I had to start and stop and start again. That's why I'm looking at and making sure that I'm on, because I'm not even seeing a thing for comments anywhere, but that's okay. If I don't see your comments while I'm talking, I will reply to them after. So anyhow, Sarah and I had talked about the getting done with what we've had that's caused us to circle around. And I think I said, I think it was November 29th that we did that Ascended World, because we're tying up the year, we're tying up the cycle, right? And it's not really the year so much as the cycle of all of this stuff. And it's a huge completion, a huge cycle completion that we haven't, well, we've brought ourselves to before, but then we've chosen to circle around and cycle again versus spiraling out to a different level often. So that's really that's where we sort of get stuck. So now, we were talking about everything coming to the surface, and so it feels like it's breathless because we're literally cleaning out all the closets at once. Everything was sort of thrown in front of us like a tornado, which I think is funny that we have a bunch of weird tornadoes going around in odd places in the country, in the United States right now. And weird things happening, in nature around the world. But what's happened is, all this stuff is being brought up to clear out, right? So Sarah and I in Ascended World on November 29th talked about what there is to do about that, right? How it is to flow through that. And so today, what I'm guided to talk about is how to move forward into this new expansion and allowing these spirals to expand and allow us to really, like I said, either you go all the way back down into you contract all the way down into source, which is then all, right? Or you expand out into source, which is all. So it goes in both directions. But this is like shifting and changing the way we're doing it into, it's almost like it's a cumulative way of remembering into our wholeness. And when we're moving forward into that, the first couple of steps feel a little repetitive. It's sort of like the things that we do, suddenly we're seeing patterns. So like, here's the thing, we're at the end of the year holiday. So we do the same things, we have traditions or whatever. And this year it's like, well, we feel different. And somehow it's breathless. Somehow it's different, but we feel like it's the same. It looks like it's the same. And so we're like, well, how do I do this differently? And all I come back to is coming back to core. I mean, honestly, this year for me has been breathless in the past 2 months between visits here, like visits to me going visit others, doing this, Sarah and I completing our Adventures in Wonderland launch of the 7 month of the seven element program, and or the 7 essence program. And now we're getting ready to launch into the next cycle of, we're going to be talking about this week and next week and the week after, talking about energetic vision boards, like creating ourselves energetically and letting the details fall into place, which is a far more expansive and powerful way of creating versus in that circle. This is where we start creating in that cycle, and we start expanding out into a place of, of newness. So like in the circle, what we do is we make the ego loves that mastery, because the ego says, oh, I've done this before. I know how to deal with this. I know how to do this the same way because I've done it before. So that's my point of reference, right? That's where ego feels really comfortable in its repetition, right? Then when we start the cycle, when we say, oh no, but I'm on a spiral and I'm spiraling out back to the remembrance as source, or into the remembrance as source, it's saying, okay, so I see the elements of repetition. I see the elements of what's happened before. And let me look at every piece of that to see where I am, where it feels true in my higher self sense, or it feels fabricated, or it feels, forced through the ego. And it's like every step of the way. Do I really align with this? Do I really feel like this is me? This is what there is for me to do, instead of this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what is expected of me. These are where we have awoken to all of these questions. So, Sarah and I have talked in the past 7 months about these 7 essences, right? And we're going to talk about those a lot more moving forward, because they really are the core underneath everything. So it's the worthiness, trust, guidance, forgiveness, or acceptance, or gratitude. That's all part of the same thing, right? Then there's self-responsibility, there's embracing the shadow, and self-love, right? So in us doing that, it's like we've gotten now into the habit of looking in every crack and crevice and seeing its purpose, seeing where it stands in each of those essences, to say, where do I believe that's incomplete for me on my journey, so that I can complete that. And now I can move forward without that, or I can move forward with the pieces of that are true to me, and I can let go of the things that are not. So that's the part that we've been training ourselves for. That's the discomfort we've put ourselves into this whole cycle, which I would say has been longer than this year. It's been more like the last 2 years, because we've had all of this stuff. One of the themes that we're moving forward with next year, and this Living the Shift is going to start rolling more into Ascended World. I'm going to do some stuff. Sarah's going to do some stuff individually, as well as we're going to be doing some stuff together. But really the theme is, to be really frank, shit happens. So create it the way that you choose. Shit's going to happen, excuse my French. But it is. I mean, it's going to happen. We have so much changing, and this is what happens when we jump off the circle and into the spiral, is now the exact same thing is breaking. All the stuff that has held things into that circle is breaking, so that we can now spiral in an expansive, remembrance-based core way, so that we can then start managing our creations holographically again, aligning with our expanded self, aligning with the part of us that sees the holograph, not just the little tiny piece of us that's here in this density and set of dimensions. But when we start managing holographically, then we can incorporate all of these pieces, and we stop trying to manage from the anthill level. And because when we can trust guidance, right? Course 2, Course 3, when we trust guidance, and we can do so from a place of acceptance and gratitude and everything, for everything being perfect in the hologram, then we allow ourselves to start seeing them and seeing it in a more expansive kind of way. So that's the thing for us to look at moving forward. And, like we can talk about, alignment of the stars, we could talk about activations, we could talk about dimensional shifts and everything else. All of that are byproducts of this, in my understanding. All of that is stuff that is happening because we are shifting through this kind of mechanism that I'm talking about. And as we shift into that mechanism, everything's going to be, like what? Like I laugh because last year I actually started rolling my eyes in judgment a little bit about the word unprecedented, because I got so tired of hearing the word unprecedented. Everything was unprecedented. This is unprecedented. Right. You know what that means? It means we're jumping out of the circle and into a spiral of expansion and contraction of wholeness into core wholeness. So of course it's unprecedented because we've been circling for a long time, and it's time for us to break the circle. We feel like, so what happens is, because we've been talking for years, many of us in the conscious community have been talking for years about how we feel tired, right? How we feel drawn down. We feel like things are repeating themselves. Oh, we don't want to repeat anymore. We want to make sure we do it differently, or do we do it differently? We then second guess ourselves. And really it's been this tiresome, because what happens, as what Sarah and I had talked about, is as we circle, we don't let go. We just accumulate, and then we don't necessarily let go of things that are complete. We bring them forward with us, so then it becomes heavier and heavier energetically, or we believe it does, and then we become tired. Then we're like, oh, this is so tiring. When we are constantly shedding what we have completed and allowing it to reassimilate into the whole, letting it go and not identifying, creating it as an identity, and instead letting it go as complete, then we free ourselves energetically to expand in that spiral so much more effectively, so much more completely. So it's so powerful in allowing that to happen. But the piece of that switch that happens is what Sarah and I talked about in Ascended World on the 29th, which is, letting all this stuff come up to really flush out, to really let go of these things that don't serve us anymore, that are complete, that we can allow to be complete. So there are many things we say, I'm done with, right? Have you ever said, I'm done? I've said it many times. The thing to always ask yourself when you say that is, am I really done? Or do I really like this? Or do I like the drama around this? Or would I feel lost without it? And I'm not saying that with any judgment, because we all do it. We all hold on to many, many things that we feel like feeds our identity, and therefore we then allow them to perpetuate, even though we complain about them, right? I sort of had that experience visiting family and everything else this past weekend, and observing others who really, sometimes others who really delve into that, that happy to be unhappy, right? That happy to complain, happy to have drama, happy to gossip and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like sometimes when I see that, it's like a different plane of existence, because I've looked through that in myself. But it's reflected. And again, what's happening is as we pull out of the spiral, right? Like it starts tight and then it loosens up. We still see it around us, even if we're complete with it inside of us, to really let it go and say, oh, I see it here on the spiral, and I'm not holding on to it. I'm letting it go. And I'm saying, okay, I see the piece, maybe the crumb that I had, and I'm going to let that go now, and we're going to just move forward without it. And there's no judgment on that. It's just where we all are, individually is very unique. So the thing is, instead of falling into step, it's to say, is this a part of me? Is this something that I still abide by? Is it something I still identify with, or makes me feel better as a person? Because often we get stuck in talking about other people, because it makes us feel better about ourselves. And that's something we're not looking at underneath, having to do with worthiness or trust or guidance or, forgiveness or, all those 7 elements. Shadow and self-responsibility and self-love. So it's all of this stuff to look at. And as we're pulling, like I said, as we're pulling out in the spiral or even getting tighter in the spiral, it's looking at where we were before. And let me get to the core underneath that. If we want to get tighter into the core, let me get into the core of why I've created that, right? As we go out in the spiral, it's also then, what can I let go of? Or is it something that I still am holding on to? Is there a crumb that's still wanting me to stay in a circle versus the spiral? And what is there for me to let go of? Because we're just going to hit it like a big brick wall, even if it's the tiniest crumb. And we're going to do it quick, and it's going to be intense until it breaks, because we have started the acceleration we really accelerated this year into breaking free of that, so that we can now address our next set of lessons, our next set of expansion in consciousness, because it's almost like we have to, I'm like, what comes to mind is the movie Back to the Future, where they have the time machine, the DeLorean time machine, right? And so the whole thing starts that he has to get up to 88 miles an hour to be able to, break through the time barrier. And it's almost like we're up to like 86.5 miles an hour. And we've just got that 1.5 miles to go to break through the barrier of the patterns that we've had in place for a very long time. And we're so close. And it's just like, okay, we just got to give ourselves that last little boost. And that's what we're doing. That's why it feels so breathless, because we're just pushing it up, pushing it, pushing it, pushing it, pushing it up. And things are changing on a dime. It's just like a constant shifting. So, and in doing that, that's what's creating all of these different energies coming to the surface, coming into remembrance to help support that. That's what we're remembering, so that we can break ourselves through that 88 mile an hour, barrier, so that we can break through the dimensional limitations, so we can break through the circle into the spiral, so that we can break into the relatively flat management in the 3 and 4D to actual holographic remembrance and creation. And that is where the fun truly lies and where it truly begins. So, how do we do that? Well, first of all, it's being in that commitment of saying, I'm going to look at everything. I'm going to continue to look at everything, and I'm going to let it go. I'm going to be free to let go of stuff that I feel like doesn't serve me. And, it's a challenge, because even this morning I had a little meltdown about something that I realized were expectations of mine. I realized that, and expectations are limitations in many ways. When we say things have to be a certain way, then we force them into a box. And with me, it was, I was seeing patterns of the old circle, and I was not willing to go there. So I started having a little bit of meltdown. Like, I was like having a little temper tantrum, going, I'm not willing to do that anymore. I am only willing to be on that spiral. And what was really sort of shown to me was, no, it's not that you're on the circle. It's that the spiral is still tight, and you're seeing the shadows of the other stuff as you're expanding out beyond it. And so I was like, okay. And so, but what that happens is when you have those things, so if you look in the spiral, right? And draw a little one, which we, of course, nobody ever knows what a spiral looks like. But if you have a spiral, oh my gosh, if I could find an open page in my notebook. If you find a spiral, right? Let me loosen my little marker here. Ooh, so in spirals, right? You have the little tight part here, right? It's almost to check ourselves so we don't jump back, right? As we see it, it's like we have to see it a little, like one more time to let it go. or if there's a little tiny crumb of any kind of shadow of identification that holds on to that pattern, it's time for us to, but it's so apparent. And the things that have changed is it's become so apparent and in our face. And the more we try to ignore it, the more apparent it becomes until it sort of blows up, which is why everything, again, feels so breathless. It's just going to continue bang, 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 hitting on us until we actually get to that place of release. So that's our task through, the end of this cycle. And I feel like the cycle is going a little beyond the calendar year as we have it set. I feel like the end of the cycle is probably going to be through middle of January, toward the end of January. I think we're finally completing it, but there's going to be more of an influx, of flurry of stuff between now and then. And then sort of like mid to late January on is going to be truly the shift into a completely new way of expansion. So that's why Sarah and I in Ascended World are going to be doing an energetic vision board workshop starting in January that goes through the month of January to start creating, to help everyone start creating differently instead of like through minutia, through the energy of consciousness, and do a vision board through that of creation of what that would look like, what that could look like from a place of energetic consciousness versus saying, specific, functions within our 3D. Because now it's time to change the pattern, time for us to do it differently. And so that's my dedication moving forward is, how do we do this differently? How do we do every step of the way differently if it serves us to do so? And how to keep ourselves conscious of that, how to keep ourselves flowing in it, because we can be conscious of it, but we can trip ourselves up all the way, because I do that sometimes too. So that's the thing to be looking at as we finish up the cycle through this month and into January of what's left for me to free myself of that's still binding me. And some of the questions are painful. Sometimes it's a relationship that's been going on for a long time. And that can be spousal, it can be lovers, it can be friends, it can be familial. And, and the thing is, when it is family or friends or lover or spouse or somebody you've been together with for a very long time, in a family situation, it's your entire life, or sometimes it's a friend situation, it's been decades. It's a challenge to let it go because we do identify with this. We create our identity around these relationships, right? How much pride we give through, I've known this person for decades. And how many times have you been with somebody who was one way, like because they were away from where they grew up, and then you go back with them to where they grew up, and then they act completely different because they're around the people they grew up with, and they fall back into that pattern because somehow their identity is still attached to it. And we do that all the time. And I'm not saying like being with, but we also do the same thing. Or have you ever been with somebody who said you did that yourself when you went back to a place where you grew up or where you had a specific key part of your life? I laugh because sometimes my husband says stuff about that, and I'll say, do you realize that we have lived even in North Carolina far longer than than the state you grew up in? Now. And he's like, yeah, it's formative years. He'll laugh, and I'll be like, no, I get it. It's formative years, though. It's like, no, that's true. Except we have all years are formative. We also put a lot of weight on our foundation and where we started. And it depends on where we started. If we really idealize where we started, then we hold on to it in a foundation one way. If we think where we started was awful and we push ourselves through it, that is a foundation of what we avoid. So that's usually what we do ego-wise, which is a much different, it's a much different way. What if we just said, okay, well, that's complete and it is perfect. It was perfect. I was having a discussion with somebody this weekend about something in my childhood, and it was like, well, maybe we should have had this happen. And I was like, no, because it was all perfect. It brought me here, got me here. It got me to where I wanted to be, apparently. And there are many, many, many awesome things about where I am today. So, and I'm discovering more and more every day. So that's the whole thing. And it's not like when we get around family, we want to fall back into that pattern. What if we just stayed conscious of being exactly where we are today, even with the people that we were with as a child, or decades ago or whatever, so that we can forge new relationships in a new way. And that's what I enjoy. I see shadows of stuff from before, and yet I see change in today. I see change in those others today. And if we can embrace those changes and still be together next to each other on the journey, that's even more fun because now we're exploring new territory. So that's the whole thing in our next phase. Our next phase is really looking at every moment as a fresh start, as a fresh opportunity, as with a fresh set of eyes to say, okay, am I clinging to this or am I expanding from it? Or am I contracting from it into, and like without having a judgment as to one being better than the other? Or am I contracting from it into that core of the source that I am? Or am I expanding into the source of wholeness, as I am? So it's either way. Am I shifting, which is really the movement out of the circle that keeps us in a cycle, and now going beyond that, knowing that the circle's complete. Know that there's 1,000 little circles in every spiral, or a bajillion, however you want to put it. So on that, I'm going to let you go. It's really an important piece of looking at things differently. And it's a challenge right now because so many are panicked because there's so much going on, and everything's been so, it's been so frantic and frenetic. And the key to remember is to step back and breathe and to observe. And to stay present, to stay here and now, and to commit yourself to being on that spiral so that things can be different, even if they seem a wisp of the same. Allowing just enough of the difference to allow you to expand or contract, So on that, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for joining me. We will see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing off on this week's Living the Shift. Have a good one.